But now we're turning our focus onto terrorism, a fast-growing phenomenon both in Africa together with across the globe. But what are the global economic and political costs of terrorism? I'm now joined in studio by Paul O'Sullivan from Paul O'Sullivan and Associates, who is also a security expert, to give us further details. Thank you so much for your time today, Paul.
Thank you for inviting me back again.
Indeed. The last time we did speak, I think it was related back to the White Widow, the young lady who got a South African passport and participated with ISIS in terrorist activities. If we do take a look at that and how things have changed over the last few months.
Good starting point, because what the White Widow did, although she wasn't on her own, what she did was she exploited loopholes, and that's what terrorists do. They look for gaps, because security anywhere around the world, no matter what subject you're approaching, for example, counterterrorism, it's about putting in layers of security, and it's about gathering intelligence, because if you don't gather the intelligence, you don't know what your threats are. So you have to know what your threats are in order to be able to put in countermeasures. And what the White Widow successfully did was exploited loopholes in the systems to obtain a South African passport. And everyone says she had a fake passport, but she didn't. She had a real passport, but she obtained it through fake circumstances. She falsely held out that she was somebody that she wasn't.
Have we done enough, though, from a South African perspective, to cover up those loopholes?
Well, that particular loophole, I'm pleased to say, has been closed, because that was a loophole that allowed for what they call the late registration of a birth. So you could be born, as she allegedly was, in 1980 or something, and then only have your birth registered 25 or 30 years later, and just say, well, I didn't get my birth registered, and I've been identityless for the last 30 years. Now, many years ago, you know, especially during the apartheid years, that was quite commonplace. But I think the government have accepted now that most of the people have got ID books, and if they haven't, it's probably their own fault that they haven't. So that loophole is gone. In fact, you can no longer apply for a birth certificate 25 years after the event.
Really? Well,
yes.
Good to hear that. I'd like to sidestep for a moment and actually touch on some of the news that we've just gotten regarding Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan and his involvement in the rogue unit at SARS. From your perspective, does this add another element of security concerns in South Africa, or what could the repercussions be for
it does in a way. You know, remember, you have to understand where the term rogue unit came from, because in my opinion, there was never a rogue unit at SARS. And it's very unfortunate, because you have all these spooks, as they call them, these ghosts on the payroll of government that we don't know about. Or, well, I know about them, but most people in the country don't know about them. We call them the security agency. Now, the state security agency ideally should be looking after the interests of the state, not looking after the interests of this politician or that politician. And I think you'll find that some of the services of state have been bastardized over the last few years, and instead of being deployed to protect the state against threats, they've been deployed to protect politicians against threats. And those threats are probably something like criminal charges for being engaged in corrupt activities. So the problem with the so-called rogue unit, and I don't believe it was a rogue unit, is that the unit was successful. They were bringing down some fairly heavy-hitting taxpayers, or should I say non-taxpayers, people such as Dave King, Radovan Krejcir. You know, they sequestrated him for 100 million rand. And there's quite a few notable cases. And the so-called rogue unit was part of a criminal investigative unit that was gathering information, legitimately gathering information, on people that weren't paying their taxes. And they were gathering that information lawfully, in my opinion. And I know this because I know some of the people that worked in the unit. And in my opinion, there was nothing unsavoury about what they were doing. But the problem was, you know, they picked on one or two targets which perhaps brought things a little bit too close to home. And that's the sad thing, because what happens then is you end up with all these resources which are supposed to be used in countering threats against the country are now being used for squabbles and infights and turf wars. And what happens is the terrorists know this. They see this and they exploit it. And we've seen evidence of that recently. We've seen, for example, I'm not going to mention any names because the matters still have to go before court, but there have been people arrested recently carrying large amounts of US dollars. Now, if you've got a few sacks of US dollars and you're moving that from one country to another, that's called money laundering. Yeah. And money laundering, of course, is part of the what I call the triangle of terror, which is drugs, money laundering, and terrorism itself. Now, when you've got those three activities going on together, the terrorists, what they do is they run side by side with drug traffickers, human traffickers, and money launderers. They exploit all the loopholes.
Paul, we are running out of time, and I'm hoping to keep you for much longer, but unfortunately we are under time constraints. But on a scale of 1 to 10, if you compare South Africa and maybe our peers on the rest of the continent as to how vulnerable we are to terrorism and terrorist attacks, with 10 being the highest level, where do we fit?
Well, I'd say we're fairly low down in the pecking order for the simple reason...
Below 5?
Well below 5. I feel quite safe here, and I think most South Africans should feel quite safe, because despite the shortcomings of our security agencies, the terrorists haven't selected South Africa as a target. That doesn't mean they're not here, because clearly when you look at people like the White Widow, they are here. And they're here below the radar. So a lot of the security services don't even realize that these people are here, but they're engaged in intelligence gathering, and they're engaged in money laundering and other activities. And I'd just like you to look, Paris and Brussels are not two good examples, but a lot of European attacks have been thwarted. The police moved in and they arrested people and they prevented the attacks from taking place. And that was not just in France and Belgium, but in the UK and other countries, Spain and Germany. Multiple arrests have taken place over the last few years. Now, that is because they have good intelligence gathering. When the intelligence agencies drop the ball, then you're in for trouble.
That's what we're hoping not to see in South Africa.
I hope so too.
Paul, thank you so much for your time. We'd love to get you back in studio to give us further insights, but thank you very much for your time.